Egypt, 1850. While excavating the underground structure at Saqqara, Egyptologist Auguste Mariette discovers a stela that identifies the complex as the Serapeum.
The Serapeum gets its name from Serapis, which was a Greek god that was a combination between an ancient Egyptian bull, Apis, and a Greek god at the time. And the combination between both was Serapis, and the Serapeum was the place where you go pray for that specific god.
The cult of the Apis bull, which later becomes known as Serapis, dates back to the very first dynasty. The very early kings of Egypt worshipped these particular bulls.
The Apis bull cult was extremely popular in Egypt all the way back 5,000 years ago. One of the first kings of ancient Egypt, the first dynasty, King Menes, who unified North Egypt and South Egypt together, would represent himself as a bull.
King Menes is documented as the first human pharaoh and is believed to have ruled around 3200 BC. According to their written history, before the reign of Menes, Egypt was ruled by the gods, who lived among humans on Earth. When the gods left, Menes inherited the throne from the god king Horus.
The ancient Egyptians believed that Horus was actually a god-man. He was a being of flesh and blood. The ancient Egyptians were in contact with the gods, physical manifestations, extraterrestrial beings who came and lived with them.
At the end of Horus's reign, the Egyptians wrote that the gods no longer lived among humans, but still held influence over earthly events. One point of connection between the gods and the mortal world was the Apis bull.
In many ways, the Apis bull was seen to be a personification of that contact between this world and the star world. So is it possible that the Serapeum is associated with the Apis bulls because there is some kind of connection with a celestial intelligence and what these underground structures really represent?
Could it be that the Serapeum of Saqqara was built more than 5,000 years ago and has a connection to otherworldly visitors? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest clues can be found by examining the size of these boxes.
When you think of a sarcophagus, you don't think of something so large as what's in the Serapeum. They're about 10 feet high and almost 20 feet long. And it's way too large for these Apis bulls.
In traditional Egyptian sarcophagi building, they would create the sarcophagus so that it very closely matched the dimensions of the body inside it in order to preserve it. These boxes are many times too large for even an Apis bull. So this is pointing to the idea that something else was concealed within these boxes.
Some ancient astronaut theorists believe an important clue as to what the giant stone boxes may have held can be found at a site 400 miles to the south. Armant, Egypt, 1929. British archaeologist Sir Robert Mond begins an excavation of an ancient catacomb called the Bukium and makes an extraordinary discovery.
There is a place called the Bukium where they found similar type sarcophagi to the Serapeum, and it was at the Bukium where they found remains mummified in the shape of a bull. And they thought, finally, we found the remains of a mummified Apis bull. And they opened up the mummified remains, and they were confronted with this stinking mass of bitumen, which is asphalt, in which they found tiny, tiny fragments of bones. Now, it was anathema in ancient Egypt to destroy any dead bodies. You had to mummify them, and you had to mummify them intact.
old Egyptians, they mummified everything. They mummified not only humans, they mummified birds, they mummified apes, they mummified dogs. Why do they mummify every animal? Because you can only be reincarnated when your body is conserved.
What could explain the mixture of broken animal bones found in this one sarcophagus? According to ancient astronaut theorists, they could be the remains of a monster.
I have speculated and I have suggested that these broken bones came from mixed creatures. In mythology,
all throughout ancient Egypt, you have not just ancient stories of these hybrid mixture beings between half man, half animal, but you have thousands of depictions in figurines, in statues, in carvings. In all the ancient Egyptian texts, you have reference to these hybrid creatures.
The classical writer Alexander Polyhistor talked about the ancient world being filled with hybrid creatures. And he said that these actually existed as living creatures.
The Egyptians were very clear in making the distinction between regular animals and then these celestial creatures that they themselves say these beings existed. And in the opinion of the classic ancient astronaut theory, they were genetic experiments by extraterrestrials. I think it's quite possible that the reason why these boxes were built is that these hybrid monsters, these genetic mutations by extraterrestrials, were placed in there so they would be ensured never to come back. Because the ancient Egyptians were very, very adamant that if you bury your dead intact, they will one day come back.